Now, I want to cover a lot of new things that we haven't talked about before, plus give you a recap of some features that are common to both our Marantz products as well as our Denon products. Let's talk first about the models that we are introducing. We're introducing 4 new Marantz SR series receivers this year, and that is the 8015, the SR8016, the SR8017, and the SR8015. So as you can see, as you move up the lineup, you get more channels of amplification, which we've talked about. You also get more channels of processing. 3 of the 4 amps have more processing channels than they have amplifier channels. But if you go out and buy an external amplifier, you can utilize more surround speakers and a more immersive surround sound system in your home. As you move up, you get more wattage. This year, we rate our wattage 2 channels driven, 8 ohms, 20 to 20 at 0.05% distortion. A lot of times when you look at a receiver, and we've talked about this, the little logo, the little sticker that you see on the receiver itself, the wattage that they put on there a lot of times is this big number, which is actually meaningless. It's one time before it blows up power. And that's not the way that we rate our power. The power of our receivers, we rate them for stereo, basically stereo listening. And because that is a more realistic way of measuring power, because that's how you would use it. Now, when you're playing it in multi-channel, we say that the receiver can deliver about, we say that at least 70% of that rated large number. And that is because when you look at a receiver, it has a power supply in it. And that power supply only has a limited amount of wattage that it can put out. And what ends up happening is as you add more speakers, you have to divide the capability of that power supply to more and more speakers. But we're saying that when you're playing this back in something like 5-channel or even up to 7-channel, you're going to get at least 70% of that rated power that you see here, which is more than enough for surround sound. Now, the thing I get asked a lot is, well, what if I want all the channels driven? And I went off on a tangent a couple of weeks ago about this, but the best way to explain it is there's never going to be a time where every single speaker needs to play the same wattage, maximum volume at the same time. So while it's a great way of looking, it's kind of a cool number, it's a meaningless number. So you're never going to have, even in the biggest explosion is not going to drive all the speakers, your center heights, your height speakers, your surround speakers, your center channel, and your main speakers all at full volume. It's just not going to happen. In fact, your center channel's probably crossed over, and your surrounds are probably crossed over, and your height speakers are not probably full range. So all of the really demanding stuff that will require a huge amount of wattage is going to be sent to your subwoofer. So while you look at these big crazy numbers and you go, how come it's not 140 watts per channel, all channels driven? That's not the way that you were going to use this receiver most of the time or any of the time. So we guarantee you're going to get immersive, impactful surround sound, regardless of how many speakers you're driving. And when you go decide you want to put on stereo and you want to just really jam out to some rock and roll or even some classical music, you will definitely have the power that's required. As we move on, all of these receivers are also HDMI 2.1. They have the ability to pass 8K, 60 and 4K, 120. They all have the ability to do HD and 4K upscaling to 8K. You can also, and as you move up the lineup, you get more ins and outs. As you move up, the larger units have 8 HDMI ins and 3 HDMI outs. There is one 40 gig HDMI input and 2 40 gigabit per second HDMI outputs, as well as a 4K zone 2. That's how we get 3 outs. And we'll talk more about that in detail later. In addition, you also get, as you move up the lineup, you get a better version of Odyssey and more surround channels. So a lot of this stuff may look familiar to the Denon products that we sell as well. There is a lot of different features we could talk about, and we've talked about these in hyper detail in other sessions, but I do want to cover a few of the ones that I like that stand out. because we introduced a lot of features in 2019 on models below $1,600 US. And people were like, man, I wish those were available in the higher end models from Marantz. So we've added them. The first thing, Dolby Speaker Virtualizer. Customers aren't, a lot of customers, while we want them, because we make speakers as well, to buy as many speakers as they possibly can to put into their rooms, a lot of times they cannot. Either they do not, or they cannot place height speakers in the ceiling on the wall, or use the height enabled speakers to bounce off of the ceilings. So what you can do with Dolby Speaker Virtualizer is you can use this. Will take Dolby Atmos content, and it will basically use cycle acoustics to make it appear that the stuff is coming from above you and all around you. So now DTS has had a version of this for a while, and now with Dolby Atmos has this version. Before, if you only had a 5.1 or a 7.1 system and the receiver saw Dolby Atmos, what it would do is it would just play back the normal Dolby True HD or DTS or Dolby True HD or Dolby Digital Plus soundtrack. Now when it sees it, it will take that Atmos information and use cycle acoustics to make it appear like it's coming from that location. So it gives you basically it gives the customer a more immersive surround, whether they have height speakers or not. Of course, having actual height speakers will be better. The next thing, TV audio sharing. I love this feature. A lot of times I entertain, and I have people in this room, and we watch a sporting event or the Grammys or some big music festival, and we'll have the system playing, and it's playing back in full surround in this room. And what I can do is now I can also take that sound, and while this is playing back in full surround, Dolby Atmos, DTS-X, DTS-X Pro, doesn't matter. I can actually make a stereo down mix and send it off to my Zone 2 or my Helios speakers. So people who are in the kitchen, in the living room, and outside can also hear the information. We do it for Super Bowl all the time. Super Bowl, the crowd we're watching football, American football, and the sound is just whizzing around the room, the crowd's cheering. But when I'm outside barbecuing, I can actually go out there and actually hear what's going on with the game. TV audio sharing. Main surround sound in the main room, send stereo to a second zone or to a Helios speaker. It's a great feature. Of course, we also have Bluetooth headphone support. That was another request. So I can actually use a pair of headphones and turn off the speakers and use the headphones to watch something at night without disturbing others. Or I can have the home theater playing back in full surround and give someone who is maybe hard of hearing a pair of Bluetooth headphones so they can actually hear what's going on and understand the dialogue without you having to crank the volume all the way up. The receivers have what's called custom input assign. I call this restaurant or sports bar mode. We've all been to a sports bar or restaurant where they have TVs along the wall playing something like maybe a sporting event. And while the TVs are playing a sporting event, they're playing music throughout the restaurant. So what this will allows you to do. If I have a variety of different inputs on a receiver, source labels on a receiver, the best way to think of it. Now your Blu-ray, your game, your cable TV, your aux 1, your aux 2, those types of things. Those are names. I assign an input to that source name, and I can assign a different video input and a different audio input to a source name. So let me give you a scenario. My kids play video games up in this theater a lot. Now, if they're playing a game that they really need to have the audio going and it really adds to the experience, what they do is they turn the receiver to game. And what happens, it pulls the audio from the game and the video from the game. But there's lots of times that my son's in here making castles in Minecraft, and there's nothing that really goes on in Minecraft except for maybe a cow going moo or some guy going Urgh. So it's not really worth me sitting here listening to that. So I can turn the receiver to aux 1, and what happens is the video will pop up from the game so my kid can play the video game, and I can play audio from a second source, like my CD player. So I don't have to listen to that. I can sit here and listen to music while he plays Minecraft. Makes a pretty trippy thing. And maybe Jim probably did it. Wish he could have done this back in the 70s. What was that? It was Pink Floyd and what movie, Jim? You take a Floyd's album and it would sync to a movie and you would just play it the whole time. Jim's probably.
I can't. No, unfortunately, my memory of those days is not as good as it possibly could be. Sorry.
It was The Wizard of Oz and The Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, The Wizard of Oz and The Dark Side of the Moon. So you can play The Wizard of Oz if you want to try it. You know, you can play The Wizard of Oz, and then the second the Wizard of Oz starts, you play Dark Side of the Moon, and it blends together perfectly. And this allows you to do that. Play The Wizard of Oz on your TV, and then grab Dark Side of the Moon and play it off a CD, and you can actually do that kind of stuff. So too bad. Yeah, I kind of figured it was kind of hazy those years for Jim, but it's a very, very cool feature. Of course, everything is Roon tested. We did a whole session on Roon and walking people through Roon and explaining the difference between Roon and HEOS and the HEOS interface. Basically, Roon makes it easier for you to interact with your music. It's more visual. It comes up, basically builds you like its own kind of Rolling Stone magazine or music magazine that's custom to you. It allows you to consolidate all of your music along with streaming services in one location. Pretty cool. All that stuff supported. Now, there's other features we could talk about, like AirPlay disabled and some other things, but there's a lot of great features here. And last year, if we had just introduced those features on our you guys would have said, "Oh my God, it's worth buying it." So that alone should be enough for you to step up for that person who has an older, 2016, 2017 AVR to want to step up to a 2020 because of these features. But as we always say, there's more. We've talked about these before as well. We have Marantz, like Denon, because we have this, we have big engineering teams that work together on things such as surround sound processing. They are always the first to market when it comes to the latest surround sound formats. And that has been the case when it comes to Dolby Atmos, IMAX Enhanced, DTS-X, and of course now DTS-X Pro. And DTS-X Pro, and we've talked about this. We did a whole session. If you want to go into it, I spend an hour, 90 minutes with the team from DTS-X or DTS, as well as I did a little 15-minute video solely on DTS-X Pro. The benefit of DTS-X Pro is DTS-X used to be limited to 11 channels of surround sound processing. Now it is not. It's limited. Now you can go up to 30 channels. So you get DTS content has immediately gotten better. You do not need new content, new DTS-X Pro content. If you have DTS-X material on a Blu-ray or whatever you're watching, it automatically now supports more surround sound channels. If you have or you purchase an SR8015, it has 11 channels of amplification built in and 13 channels of processing. I'll say it again. The 8015 has 11 channels of amplification built in and 13 channels of processing. So if you go out and buy an external amplifier, you can play up to 13 speakers in your home, and there's a variety of different combinations. So now DTS-X Pro can continue to grow. One of the benefits of this technology is as we add more and more channels of speakers to a room, the DTS-X Pro will continue to grow because it can support up to 30.2 channels of surround. Now the current DTS-X was limited to 11.1. Didn't matter how many speakers you had in the room or how many speakers you want to put in the room. The speed limit was 11 channels, and now we have the ability to do 30 channels of surround. One point that I want to point out, because I get asked this question a lot over the last few sessions, is if you look at Dolby Atmos and DTS-X, they support a whole lot of surround and surround channels. Yet the way they describe the numbers are different. So if you look at DTS, they say it's a 30.2, But when you look at Dolby Atmos, they call it a 24.1.10. And I get asked a lot, why do they describe these numbers differently? Well, it's the thought process of each brand. Number one, DTS says that all the surround channels are of the same quality. That also applies to Dolby Atmos, by the way. Whether they're height speakers or whether they're surround speakers along your horizon, the quality of all of these speakers are the same. They are full range, 20 to 20, same quality of all of the speakers. So why define them differently? I have 30 positions plus 2 LFE channels, and they can be in the ceiling or they could be on the floor, but the quality of them are all the same, hence the 30.2. Dolby Atmos, the quality of all those speakers are the same as well. But Dolby likes to define what sits on the floor versus what is above you. So what is along the horizon versus the things that provide you with effects above you, height effects. So they're saying there's 24 speakers on the floor positions, the 24 positions on the floor, plus 1 LFE, plus 10 height speaker locations. So if I wanted to convert the DTS-X Pro number, it would be a 17.2.13. So DTS-X Pro would be a 17.2.13. Dolby Atmos in DTS-X Speak would be a 34.1. So while Dolby has more overall speaker positions, DTS-X has more speaker positions above you. Which one's best? The one that you like. It's just two different approaches. There is a new encoder, decoder in the receiver and a new renderer. So DTS-X comes in, the objects, any objects that are in the mix will be handled by the renderer, and the renderer will look at how many channels you have in the room and determine where to place, which speakers to use in your system to place that object in your room. And depending on the system, it can support up to 30 channels. We support 13 at this time. If the content is channel based, it goes to the up mixer, and the up mixer has the option can up mix the channels that are available to utilize all of the channels that you have set up in your room. If the content is even not in DTS-X, it's in DTS or DTS HD, that it will go through as channels, and it will still be up mixed by the up mixer to utilize all of the channels in your room. And finally, if I have non-DTS content like PCM, like Apple TV, I can feed it. I can make an Apple TV feed PCM and a lot of services will feed PCM, like my computer. It will also upmix that up to 13 channels. The next thing is when you look at DTS-X as well as IMAX Enhance, they have the ability to utilize new different channels. The first thing, IMAX theaters have 2 surround channels or 2 center channels. If you go to IMAX theater, the screen is massive. It's so big that what they did is they have a center channel. Basically, they have 2 center channels, one above it and one in a more traditional location. That ensures that the sound comes from the center of the screen, and I also have the ability, if King Kong or Godzilla, some giant walks by, I have the object of mixing that scream or that roar from the center height to give you this massive sense of scale. So that optional channel, that channel that's available in IMAX, is also available in DTS-X Pro. So if I go back here, you'll see that I have in DTS-X Pro, I have the option of using a center front height channel. And that center front height channel can either, depending on the mix, can play the same or something completely different. It's all up to the sound engineer. If I turn on Neural X up mixer, you can also utilize the top surround, or what Aural 3D calls the voice of God. Now, and I can utilize all of these. Now, remember, because DTS Pro is not channel-based, it's object-based. If a lot of times, if I have a helicopter that's hovering above the screen, a regular system will utilize its front mains maybe it's it's front heights, and maybe it's center channel to try to give you a phantom image of the helicopter hovering above the screen. That object now can just be sent to that channel. Remember, more channels means you get a better sweet spot. It's the more channels you have, the easier it is for a receiver to put objects in that position. And a very common position in a lot of movies is above the screen. So now it actually has content there. The next thing is you get flyovers. A helicopter starts on this side of the room and flies over my head to the other side of the room. Normally, to get that effect of that helicopter hovering above me, I have to try to mix it evenly between my height speakers to try to make it sound like it's above me. Now the receiver will look at it and say, you have a top surround. So I'm going to, instead of me trying to make a phantom image of that helicopter, I will put that information into the speaker above you. So it gives you a better effect as things fly over. So it's a really cool thing. So you can utilize it on more than just, even if there's, because it's not a channel base, whether you have DTS-X content, PCM content, or it's just how many speakers do you have to render that object in space. Now, these receivers, like we said, 11 channels of amplification, 13 channels of processing. So you have the ability to do a couple of different configurations. You can do a more traditional Dolby Atmos, which has front heights, rear heights, and top middles, or middle heights. And I can set up a Dolby Atmos configuration, which will work great with Dolby Atmos and DTS-X Pro and IMAX Enhanced. All of those technologies will use all of those speakers, that's 7.2.6. Or I can do an Aural 3D / DTS-X Pro / IMAX Enhanced configuration that has a center height and a top surround. Now, when I use this configuration, Dolby Atmos will still sound great, but it will not utilize that top surround and that center height. So Dolby Atmos will be played back as basically 7.2.4, and in the other three formats will play back in 7.2.6. Now, that is because that is you have to pick between these two configurations. And the question is, people go, well, what if I don't want to pick? What if I want to have the 7.2.6 configuration for Dolby Atmos and the 7.2.6 configuration for DTS-X, IMAX Enhanced, and Aural 3D? That is where an AV8805 comes in. If I have 15 channels of amplification, I can put in not only the top surround and the center height, but I can also put in those top middles. And I can go into the menu and go into amplifier assign and switch between those two configurations. I ran over to the office and I grabbed one of the first 8015s. Behold, one of the first 8015s sitting in my house. It's fun to play with these things. It is a absolute tank, a behemoth of a receiver. The build quality is absolutely outstanding. And I always bring them so I can show you the menu systems. As before, I can go into manual, and then I can go in and choose my amplifier assignment. And there is a variety of combinations that you can choose and that we can explore. If I go into amplifier assign, I have the ability to go in and choose a 13, say I choose 13 channels. Now I need to have a preamp, an amplifier drive a pair of the speakers. I have the option of driving the fronts or using it to drive the middles. We suggest you drive the fronts. So Jim, why don't you explain why you should drive the fronts while I restart this thing, and I'll be back.
If you are going to add external power amplifiers, the first place I would put one would be on the main channel. If you're going to go through the expense of adding external power amplifiers to look for better sound or the ability to play louder, as a general rule, the main speakers are going to require the most power and frankly are going to be the ones that you hear the most. So I would instantly do that. The other reason is that most of the time, and I'm just going to say most of the time, you aren't going to buy a 2-channel power amp that has not a lot of power in it. I almost said wimpy. that is not powerful. Again, that would just not be something I would mess with. So I want to make this clear. I tried to make it clear.
Mhm.
So when you switch to preamp mode in the new AVRs that have it,
Mhm.
when you do that, you shut off all of the power amps. So
Yes.
all
So
of the
let's.
channels stop working.
Yeah, exactly. So if we go up here and I go to preamp mode and I switch this on, come here, you'll notice that you have to have a preamp for every single speaker that's in there. So it
An
just physically
amplifier, Phil.
an amplifier.
An
So it physically disconnects all of the internal amplification in when I actually do this. If I put it into 13 channel, now I can disconnect one preamplifier, two of the preamplifier channels, and I decided to disconnect the preamp section for the fronts to run the to utilize an external amplifier. So that is one of the differences, and that's another thing we were going to talk about here. And Jim had already covered preamp mode, which is available on the 6015, 6017, and 8015. When I go into 11 channel mode on the 6015 and the 7015 is when preamp mode is when I get this pre-out front thing that we're talking about here. And of course, when I go to preamp mode, regardless of those models, it is going to physically disconnect the amplifier stage.
Can we circle back just for a second before we get deeper into this? One of the questions we had was if we process 13 channels of sound, well, how do we get the rest of those 30 channels that Atmos and DTS-X Pro can provide? So would you just explain to the group that, well, you can't?
The content is not mixed in mostly, it's not really mixed in channels. What both DTS and Atmos does, if you go back and you watch the session with Xperi, DTS, those guys, what they do is the first thing the company does is they make a bed layer of maybe 9.1. That allows that content, Dolby Atmos content or DTS-X content or DTS-X Pro content to be backwards compatible. So they mix a bed layer of 9.1. Then they have a huge amount of what they call objects, over 100 objects that they can shoot if they choose to use them. They can take that object and put it in a location in space. Your system has 30 speakers that it can utilize to put that object in that location. If you only have a 5.1.4, it uses that 5.1.4 to try to put that object in this location. If I'm crazy enough in the future to buy a 30.2 channel system, I have more speakers to utilize to place objects in their precise position. So you're not losing anything. As you add more channels, you get a wider sweet spot. You can sit in more places and that object will appear in that position. And the more speakers you have, the more precisely the object can be presented. If the object is a helicopter above my head, and I have a 5.1.4, what it will do is most of the system will mix the sound in the front surrounds, the front heights, and the rear heights equally to make it appear like there is a big helicopter above my head. If I have a top surround, that object will just come out of the top surround. So all you're doing is more speakers means a better way of positioning the objects. And that is why the content, DTS-X content, is backwards compatible. It will now work in DTS-X Pro because it wasn't mixed in channels. There's the bed layer of 9.1 and everything else is objects. And that's where those other speakers come in.
Would you talk just for a second about why in a home you would not really need 30 channels? You know, I mean, you can buy devices to decode that many channels.
Oh yeah.
But
yeah,
there's a difference between a theater and a home, right? I mean, a real theater.
Exactly.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay, so Jim, when we do surround sounds demonstrations, he always wants to max out the rooms, and the reason for that is, like I said, it really helps with a wider sweet spot or a bigger theater. So there are some pieces that actually are out. Trinoff makes one. It's a great piece. It's the price of a small BMW. It's the price of a big BMW sedan, and it will. And if you buy that plus 30 amplifier channels, you can actually have 30 channels in your house. Now, that system is normally going to go in a very large theater in a very large home. You're not going to put a Trinoff 30-channel system in a room with a single couch. That's just not where that goes. That goes in, someone actually builds a theater with 25 seats with 4 or 5 rows. And what you're trying to do is having all of those different surround speakers and all those different height channels means that I get, number one, a more precise placement of the object, and number two, a great surround sound experience in every seat in that room. The reason why you go to movie theater, and you just see speakers everywhere is because there's people sitting in a movie theater everywhere. So having more channels means that you have a better experience, whether you're sitting dead center in the theater or off to the left or more towards the front or way towards the back. And that's why Jim, every time we go someplace, wants to just those surround speakers, as many as we possibly can in a room, because we run multiple rows of seating, and that ensures that whether you're sitting in the middle of the room or in the rows and kind of the front or in the rows and towards the back, you get a better experience. So, Jim, is that kind of what you wanted to stress?
Yeah, and the truth is, unless you have a giant room, right? You don't need 30 channels.
Exactly.
I mean, the speakers would be so close together that there would be, I can't say absolutely no benefit, but man,
Yeah,
the amount of benefit
exactly.
would
We call it diminishing returns. Unless you have a very large room, as you'll eventually get to diminishing returns. We're still struggling to get people to do 5.1.4. And we're happy that they're going to 7.1.6 and 9.1.4. Eventually, people will go. There will be people that will go more, but eventually, you get to in a living space, it's diminishing returns. The benefit of this is you never have to worry about it. The odds of you getting to the point where your system can do more than what the content can provide, it's probably not going to happen. And that's the peace of mind of both Dolby Atmos and DTS. Because I used to say, how many versions of Star Wars do I have to buy? I bought the Pro Logic, then I bought the 5.1, then I bought the 7.1. Now, if you get a Dolby Atmos version or a DTS-X version of something, that's it. As you add more surround sound channels and the system gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that's it. That demo will continue to live on. All right. Now, some other things we want to talk about, go back into this, and we'll answer more questions later, is if you look at the top of the menu system next to the Marantz logo, you will see speaker preset. That is another new feature here that is built into this receiver. And this allows you to have multiple presets for amplifier configurations, as well as Odyssey programs, surround sound modes, subwoofer levels, and things like that. So let's go in here and actually change this to something. Sometimes I only have 11 channels and I don't have a secondary amplifier. And I have a backyard patio. And I want to, like I said, have the movie playing back in surround sound. And at the same time, I want to use the amplifiers in the receiver to play speakers out in at my barbecue. So I can set that as preset number 1. Is I can go back and go down to speaker preset, and you'll notice that it goes from 1 to 2. And now when I go back here, you'll see that now this preset has its own crossover settings, bass settings, 2-channel playback settings, everything. And I can go back here to amp assign, and I can set this one for 11 channel. I can go into the menu and switch it. I can go into the options menu and switch it, or there's these little buttons on the remote control. And let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, they're called Smart Select. So if I'm watching a movie and I want to all of a sudden have my second zone play, I hit preset number 1. And now the system goes from an 11-channel system in this room to a 9-channel system, and now I'm playing zone 2. The second I get done barbecuing, I hit preset number 2, and my rear heights come back on. It's pretty slick. It's a very, very cool feature. because you can not only save amplifier configurations, you can also save Odyssey configurations. We always recommend use the Odyssey Multi-Q app to do your calibration or do your room optimization setup, because it is more effective. There's a whole section on Odyssey to talk about that. But so what I do in my room is I have during the daytime I have a 75-inch TV and I have my curtains open. That affects my acoustics. I do a full calibration under Odyssey. I adjust my speaker levels. I can even change the amplifier configuration like I just showed you, and I can save it under preset number 1. Then at night, I can lower the screen, close the curtains, do another Odyssey calibration, and I can actually switch the amp configuration from 9-channel zone 2, which is I was using during the day, to 11 channels of surround sound in my theater to listen to that at night. And I can save that as a preset. Now, before, I had the ability to switch between Odyssey settings by going back into the app each time and reloading it, or reloading it from a USB menu. Now I can just do it with the touch of a button. I can have a setup for just me listening to music, and everything is tuned for my sweet spot. Or I can do a calibration or a setting to make it great for my entire family. And then the last one, which I like, is I can go in, and we talk about these receivers having preamp mode. Well, I can go in and say I go out and I buy all the amplifiers required for my theater. I can run preset number 1 as preamp mode. And when I hit preset number 1, my theater plays back in full surround. Now I'm deciding that I'm not going to play this theater. I'm going to go down into the den. What I can do is I can hit preset number 2. And what I can do is I can run all of the speaker wires from the amplifiers that are not being used to a second zone. And when I hit preset number 2, that receiver is now powering a surround sound system and all the speakers in another room. Now, you can't play different things in both spaces at the same time. But this is actually a cool configuration for a person that wants to maybe have a theater and maybe have a game room, and they're only going to be in one place at one time, and they can use one amplifier to drive both locations. And these can be done utilizing, like I said, from the menu, like I showed you. There's a smaller option menu there, as well as these quick select buttons that are on the remote control. Those quick select or smart select buttons are really good. I have a control system in my house and a smart select button on my receiver. When I program my remote control for that, normally when my wife hits watch movie, it's got to turn the receiver on. It's got to switch to the proper input. It needs to switch to the proper surround sound mode. It needs to go to a proper volume level, all this stuff. So there's multiple 12-volt trigger to drop my screen, all these different things I have to program in to my control system, which could cause problems with reliability. Many of those settings can be saved to a single smart select button. So instead of me putting in 9 commands that my remote control has to do when I push that first button, I can put in 1 command. It's way more reliable for anybody that does any kind of custom integration to do as much as possible. Amplifier configuration, surround sound, everything you want to do utilizing the smart select, and then put that 1 code inside of your control system. It makes it for a far more effective way to go. We talked a lot about some really cool features. We've just spent an hour talking about all the cool things, and we haven't even talked about that word that starts with an H that I get asked about a million times. So even if you're not into 8K or 4K 120, there is a benefit to buying one of these new AVRs.